everyone, and welcome to Creative Live. I'm your host, Kenna Klosterman, and we are here for another live episode right here on Creative Live TV of our podcast, We Are Photographers, where we bring you to our favorite photographers, filmmakers, and industry greats to dive into their minds and talk about their careers, their personalities, and what their experiences are, both the ups and the downs, so that we all know that we are not alone in our creative work and creative family. So before we start, and I bring on our very special guest today, Kate Woodman, I would love to hear where it is that you are tuning in from. We love to do those shout outs. So whether you are watching on creativelive.com/TV, where you can click in the chat and join your fellow creative livers all over the world, let me know where you're tuning in from. Or if you're watching on our social channels, let me know as well. I'm here north of Seattle, and Kate is joining us from Portland. So 2 Pacific Northwesters here, and let us know where you are tuning in from. So far, we've got Wisconsin, so keep those coming in. Okay, so I am, without further ado, very excited to bring on, for the very first time here on Creative Live, Kate Woodman. And Kate is a commercial and editorial photographer. Like I said, she's based in Portland, but she was born in Germany and grew up in Connecticut. She, like I said, works both in the commercial and editorial worlds. She has a client list that include Airbnb, Nike, Harman Kardon, Marie Claire, British Vogue, and so many more. If you know and love her work, you know that she has a very cinematic narrative style, is all about color, and we're going to dive into some of those topics. Super excited to hear how she started her career as an engineer and then went to New Zealand and then became a photographer. So we're going to talk about that. And again, her work is very unique and stylistic. And so we are going to dive right in. We've got West Virginia, Chicago, Liverpool, Bend, Oregon, Jersey City, India, Nashville, Colorado. All you out there, please give it up for Kate Woodman. Kate, thank you for joining us today.
Hi, Kenna. Thank you for having me. What a marvelous introduction. I wish I was exciting in my day-to-day life as I sound on paper.
Well, I believe you are. We all are. Kate, how are you? Where are you joining us from? I said Portland, but yeah, what it is now, we are recording this. It's April 1st. We are now in April.
I don't know how that happened. Happy 1-year quarantine anniversary.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
I'm good. April is turning out to be a crazy busy month. I'm in the middle of multiple bids for some commercial jobs, which is awesome. It's nice to see that sort of start up again after last year's insanity. So I feel like there's hope on the horizon. So
well, that's good for everybody to hear out there as well. Yeah. There is hope on the horizon for all of us, all of you who are working photographers. So talk to us about the commercial world. Before we dive back into some of your history, what are the types of, when you say you're putting out a bid, what are the types of jobs that you have done and are going for, and how that came about?
Yeah, so about 5 years ago, I decided to make the switch into full-time photography. And at the time, I was I thought I was going to be a fashion photographer, and I was like, okay, yeah, I'll do the editorials, I'll do the fashion stuff, and then quickly kind of realized that while I appreciate fashion, I'm not a fashionable person. I don't care about trends. I like fashion as this kind of like means to an end in my imagery, which to me is all kind of about storytelling. And so the natural kind of progression for me was to sort of jump into the commercial realm, where I think there's a little bit more room for conceptual work and these sort of narrative series or stories that I can tell that maybe just aren't as prevalent in either the portrait or the fashion realm. So, and I think kind of aesthetically, my style sort of lends itself well to that kind of commercial realm. So, with that being said, I really have only kind of in the past 5 years started getting a rhythm in the commercial scene over the last 2 years, I would say. It takes some time to kind of make those inroads in that realm. It's pretty competitive. But I've been really fortunate thus far that the projects that I've been able to work on in the commercial realm are pretty well aligned with my style. So like, for example, last year I did a shoot for Airbnb. It was at the last Blockbuster in the world, which is located in Bend, Oregon, a couple hours from where I live in Portland. And the whole concept was, let's take this back to like the late 80s, early 90s style with these like, the like teal and pink and blue colors and like the retro furnishings and all that, which if you know anything about me, nostalgia is kind of like my jam. And being the 90s kid that like grew up in that time frame and went to Blockbuster on the weekends all the time, it was like it was magic. Like I could have stopped at that job and been happy. But I think it's been really, I have been fortunate in that the other types of jobs, whether it's healthcare stuff or lifestyle stuff, it all, when you kind of figure out your style, people come to you and they look for that kind of style, right? And so I've been able to kind of work within my aesthetic while getting paid to do these commercial jobs, which has been really amazing.
I mean, that's the dream, right?
Yeah, for sure.
You're living the dream, Kate.
I'm trying.
Tried. But I think that's I want to dive into a number of the things that you talked about, because a lot of people, there's defining your style, finding your style, doing the work to show what that is.
Yeah.
And then figuring out the landscape of the commercial world, the editorial world. And so it's all just like these building blocks that you've, been able to do. And therefore, that's why we wanted to share all of, how you've done that, or the journey along the way, because I'm sure it wasn't all easy peasy at all.
No.
So let's dive into the aspect of your style, because I know, again, a lot of people know you for that cinematic look, that narrative, the conceptual side. So I mean, how did you go about showing that to the world? It sounds like it was a lot of personal work. Is that correct?
For sure. I mean, finding a style is definitely a journey. I wish there was a shortcut to being able to just like snap your fingers and figure it out. But no, I mean, for me, it was a journey, kind of finding what interested me and how I could translate that visually while simultaneously trying to put that out into the world. So you're trying to like figure out who you are while you're trying to promote who you are, which is an interesting kind of process. And so, it's iterative. There's an evolution to it. But to give you kind of a brief synopsis of how I kind of came into my style, I started photography on the landscape side of things. So I have always been interested in, beautiful scenery and vistas and like the colors and sunrise and, all the reasons that people get into landscape photography. And that was when I was living in New Zealand, which has all these amazing landscapes. But then I moved back to the States and I was living outside Philly, which doesn't quite have the same atmosphere. So at that point, I was like, well, I still really like photography. I'm going to jump into something else. And so I actually went the complete opposite direction and started doing portrait and fashion photography. So I set up a studio in my house and shot almost exclusively on a painted backdrop that I had painted for myself for probably the next year and a half or so. And at that point, I was considering the fashion realm and thinking that was the direction that I wanted to go. But I still was drawn to this landscape side of things too. And there was such a huge disconnect in both of those things. And I was like, I have to find a way to merge these together and kind of make them fit in the same space. And so over time, that involved experimenting more with shooting on location and then eventually getting into composite work. And so, over the course of many years, I mean, it's still evolving, but that kind of progressed into the sort of aesthetic that I have today, which I think merges both the landscape or the environment and the context, and then the people themselves. And for me, what it comes down to is I want to tell a story, but I want that story to have context and to be able to kind of relate to it in a way where it's not just, this face-to-face interaction. It's about what's going on in the entirety of the scene. And so, yeah, if I'm just rambling, please let me know. But...
No, I wanted to jump in because that's I wanted to talk about some of your particular images, because as you are describing creating the scene, the character in it, there's definitely this element of character and sort of ambiguity of you see something's going on, but you don't really know what the story is. So maybe we can pull up one of your images at we have a few images. And again, if you're listening to this audio-wise, you can go to Kate's website and it'll be pretty clear as to what we're talking about. But the first one being, there's this image that you have where you're in a gas station.
Mm-hmm.
And the light is very dramatic. I'm also curious, a lot of these are panos as well. And I'm curious if that's the cinematic side of it. But there's a woman and she's, got a bag, and another woman. So tell us about sort of the creation of this image.
Yeah. I'm glad you picked that one, because it's one of my favorites. And I feel like it's really kind of encompasses all of the things that I want to include in my imagery. So the kind of backstory to all of this is I live about 5 minutes from that gas station. And in winter in Portland, it can get really, really foggy. And, fog, cinema, that kind of like haze, like I'm obsessed with it. So I had driven by this gas station a number of times. I was like intrigued by the colors and by the lights and the geometry of it all. And woke up one morning pretty early while it was still foggy. And I was like, I'm just going to go drive by, see what's up with this gas station, see if it's that fog is catching some of the lights. And sure enough, it was. It was open at the time. I'm pretty sure that the gas station attendant thought I was some crazy, insane person for taking photos of it at 6 o'clock in the morning in midwinter. But those are the weird things you got to do to get the shot. So I grabbed a shot just of the gas station alone, so without any people in it, because the challenge of working in environmental stuff or landscape stuff is you're kind of beholden to the conditions, right? So calling up a model at 4 o'clock in the morning to come out and get ready in hair and makeup and do that, she probably wouldn't have been a huge fan of me. But so I had this plate of an image, and I think, speaking to the panoramic aspect, I think a lot of that comes from my landscape background, but also cinematography. I mean, typically in movies you'll see like a 16:9 or a 21:9 aspect ratio, so that definitely gives that kind of cinematic effect. But yeah, so I think that that particular location lent itself well to that kind of composition. And at the time, I was doing a lot of experimentation with composite imagery for those reasons I had listed, right? Like there are just a lot of logistical challenges with getting people on location at the right time. And for me, composite was a way to kind of make everyone else's lives easier, except myself in the post-processing aspect of things. But
can I just hop in and say
that
I did not know that this was a composited image.
Good. Hold it.
I did. Like, I literally thought this was a set, you know. So how do you then go from, in this particular case, like this plate to adding the elements of the characters within it?
Yeah, so that's the fun part, and that's kind of the conceptual part of the work. And I have hundreds of plates that are just waiting for ideas to pop into my head. But yeah, I mean, I think I sat with this one for, I don't know, at least 6 months, if not longer, just trying to think of what would what would make sense in this scene. And you had mentioned something before about like creating the sense of kind of ambiguity, and that's exactly it. Like, I love a story that it feels like kind of a out of context still from a movie, right? Where you put on a random movie, you hit pause, and there's a scene, but you don't really know what's happening. You kind of have to decipher it from that one still. So that's kind of always my aim with my work. But I think
That's exactly it. Like, it is, and because I know on, like, you also do stills on sets.
yeah,
And so, like, when I was looking at those on your website, it took me a minute to realize, oh, this was an actual set versus
yeah,
your images that like look like a set. So
yeah.
it's definitely that.
I'm just living in my own movie, I guess. Um, yeah. So yeah, then I mean, the concepting is always the really interesting stuff because there's no true process for it. It's just sometimes you wake up with an epiphany, and sometimes you have to wait 6 months to figure out and massage an idea that makes sense in the environment that you want to put it. So I think this was kind of a combination of both, where I had nothing for a while, and then one day this idea just kind of came to me, and I was like, well, it's a gas station. And it looks kind of like sort of 80s cyberpunky. So let's get these characters in here that are sort of dressed in that kind of style. We can make it a little bit more fashion. And I'm gonna have her carrying a gas can, and the other girl's gonna be lighting a cigarette, and they're gonna look like they're twins. And it's kind of creating that decisive moment, right? Where it's like you've set up the rising climax, and there's like a moment of tension, but you're not quite there yet. There's no resolution. You don't know what's going to happen next. And so for that, I felt like the carrying the gas can and the lighting the cigarette was just like, are they gonna light this place up? Like, what's happening? Are they
Right.
passing through? So, and I really like to kind of leave it to the viewer to come to their own conclusion as to the resolution of the story.
So it's really interesting because I've heard you say before that you're in there's kind of, not that there's only two things, but there's people who are like myself who like street photography, documentary photography. You just mentioned the decisive moment, which for me is often, I think about that as like documentary. So then
Yeah.
to do conceptual decisive moment, I think is super interesting. And I've heard you say that like that you're not street photography. Is that correct?
No, I'm the opposite. I mean, but that's a really interesting parallel, and like hadn't really thought of that. But I think in general, that's kind of what draws me and probably a lot of other people to photography, is this kind of moment in still form where you can't see around it, right? You can't see what happens before, you can't see what happens after. So if you can capture something that's kind of right at that pivotal moment, that leaves so much to the imagination, and I think that really engages with the viewers. So whether you approach that from the photojournalistic perspective, where that's really just about timing, and that requires a whole level of skill that I certainly don't have. I'm very much like, this is a production. I'm like concepting this out for months ahead of time, planning out all of the minute details, and making sure that this really is kind of a planned crucial moment. But at the end of the day, we're still trying to achieve the same kind of response.
Yeah, it's super interesting. So heavy on the or heavy on the pre-production.
Yeah.
Tell us about how important that is to the type of work that you do, and kind of some of what are the teams that you put together to be able to create this type of work.
Yeah. So pre-production it's incredibly important for my stuff. I think for my personal work, but also at a lot. I think part of what has helped me kind of grow commercially is there's so much pre-production in the commercial world, especially when you're dealing with clients and a lot of different people's opinions. That all has to be really hashed out as much as possible ahead of time. And I think coming from a conceptual, more production-based background, that's kind of set that up well. I've set myself up well for success in the commercial world. Right now, I'm working on a treatment that I've been working on for 5 days straight. And it's all just like planning as much as you can beforehand so that you can give your client reassurance that you'll be able to execute the job when you're ready to go out there and perform it. And it's the same process for my personal work. I just want to make sure that I've given everything the attention that it deserves, making sure I'm not missing anything crucial from a narrative perspective ahead of time. So that way, when I'm ready to go out and take the shot, the vast majority of the work is already done for me. And that doesn't mean that there isn't room for improvisation in the shooting process. I think that stuff it's really important to kind of keep an open mind and not stay too tightly honed in on your plan, because if you don't allow for a little bit of that, then you might miss something really fantastic. But I think I firmly believe that the better you kind of prepare and set yourself up, the more effective your work will be, and the more quickly you'll be able to execute it as well. Which is nice for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, it's super interesting because, again, there's like all this pre-production, and then I'd imagine then a good amount of post-production, especially when you're doing the compositing as well. Yeah. And I mean, so you start to think about it and you're like, wow, there's, so much that goes into creating these types of images. What I'm curious about is you have some images that are like just that image, and you're telling, like you said, a whole decisive moment in that story in that image. Mm-hmm. Then you also have series with the in. So yeah. When do you are you kind of always thinking about a series, and then like maybe it just turns out to be one image, or how do you think about it when you're maybe talk about a series that you have that and why you did series?
Yeah, I think honestly, a lot of the decision making on that has to do with the process. So with composite stuff, if I have a plate, I just have the one plate, and often it's from a place where maybe I can't get back to it anytime soon, or I can't kind of recreate those conditions. So for those, if I have kind of an existing backplate, I want to make sure that I'm creating a story within that image that is kind of fully encompassing. Whereas with the narrative series, those are almost predominantly like 100% shot on location, in situ. There's very little compositing that happens in those. And there's also a little bit more of a kind of like free flow state, I guess, when those are produced. So I do kind of have these different approaches to shooting from a technical perspective. And I think which one that is kind of dictates what the eventual series or story is going to look like. It's hard to say if I have a preference, because I think they both kind of serve different purposes. But coming from a background where I'm just so obsessed and enamored with movies and film and that sort of thing, I feel like the narrative series to me is like kind of going back to the film stills thing, right? Like if I could pick 10 still frames from my favorite movie and have to make those frames tell the complete story of the movie, which ones do you pick, right? And that's the puzzle, which the challenge of that is really fascinating to me.
Have you ever actually done that as like a deconstructing one of your, like that, what you just said, like take a movie and try to pick 10 stills? That's interesting.
No, I mean, I've definitely done some like analysis of frames in a movie for different purposes, like dissecting composition and lighting and color and all that stuff. But no, I haven't actually like sat down with a favorite movie and been like, all right, let's distill this into the 10 top shots and see what we get. But it would be an interesting exercise to do.
I think it would be. I think it would be for everyone out there.
Yeah, you have homework to do now.
Homework, yeah, exactly. Let's dive into, because it is very, your colors are very cinematic, and there's the, these dark and so, and I know you teach about color. So talk to me about how sort of that, I don't know, fascination with color came about for you. I know you have art history background or just love of, and then what do you think about with regard to color as you approach a project? Does color come first, or talk to us about color.
So I could talk for 3 years about color. It's interesting. I don't think I can really pinpoint a time or a point where I was like, okay, I am going to really focus on color. It was just one of those things that kind of naturally came through my work. And honestly, it wasn't something that I had noticed specifically in my work until other people had started pointing it out. Sometimes you need to get outside perspectives to get a sense of what is actually going on here. But I have always been interested in art and art history. I have a degree in art history. Prior to that, I was always like drawing and painting. And so, having taken art classes since kindergarten, I feel like I kind of just by accident developed a fairly strong sense of color and mixing color through paints and kind of what that looks like. And I think a bit of a side note, but I feel like if photographers really want to know about color, they need to study painters, because painters have a true understanding that photographers just like can't possess due to the nature of their craft. So having a bit of a background in that, I think, has kind of helped that process. But the other thing that seemed kind of, in retrospect, seems kind of a pivotal moment for me with regard to color, doesn't have anything to do with photography, but it has a lot to do with interior design. My husband and I bought a house and we renovated the whole thing. And obviously when you're renovating a house, color choices and matching colors and that sort of things becomes really important. And I found that I became really kind of obsessed with that, with the color aspect of things during the renovations, and really focusing on things like, how does color shift in different lighting, in different spaces? How does it make it feel in terms of scale? And those were kind of things that I sort of picked up in that process and somehow was able to apply to my photography.
And I want to say both like figuratively and literally, because you've done a lot of work in your home. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And especially perhaps in this past year as well. But I'm curious then about about like, do you, as you're walking around your house, are you actually then like seeing scenes in your own home because you've used it as a set a lot?
Yeah. So if I wasn't a photographer, I would probably be a set designer or an interior designer, because my master's degree is actually in historic preservation. So I am obsessed with old houses and old architecture, which is probably why you see a lot of interiors and architectural features in my work. So it's nice to know all these things, and all my millions of dollars spent on education have kind of come together in some way. But yeah, so I do actually use my house that I'm currently in a ton for my personal projects. And in fact, I don't know, there's probably 20 of my images on my site that are shot in my house, which to me is really great, because I think it just kind of proves to photographers that you don't need a $1 million budget to get good creative work. It just requires a little bit of imagination and a little bit of being a problem solver, right? And making the most of the spaces that you have. And I think one of the really amazing things about color is it's such a transformative element in a scene. So you had asked previously about kind of my decision with regard to color. Do I think about that prior to shooting? Absolutely. I think about it in, ambient, like, what are my ambient colors in the scene? What do I have to work with initially? What do I have? What can I add in styling or props that will introduce certain colors for either an emotional or conceptual purpose? How does that tie into the existing colors? I've painted walls in my house for specific photo shoots, and then so there's kind of like the pre-production side of color, and always thinking about what do these colors mean, and all color has meaning for different people, and different meanings in different contexts too. And then there's also color on the post-production side of things, which to me is kind of like the thing that ties everything together. But I don't want to rely on color just in the post-processing side of things, because at that point you're there, right? Your cake is baked. This is just the icing on it. So if you didn't have the right ingredients in the first place, then you're missing out. So yeah.
It's so, I mean, I understand why all of your, like you said, all your different backgrounds and the things that you're passionate about and have learned about, the interior design, the art history, the architecture, that all plays into your images. And I'm wondering if we can talk a little bit about the spaghetti image.
Yeah.
And you guys could all, if you're listening to this, see it on her Instagram or her website. But in terms, when I think of color, like there's this bright red dress, and then there's blue, and then there's like nuances as you go within. So how did you, and is this your house? And then, and then how did you approach, and we also, if you're watching the video, we saw your dog in the background. And so we saw your dog in the image. I love it. So talk to us about the creation of this image.
Yeah, so that was my dog's favorite photo shoot ever, because he got to eat the spaghetti off the table. He was super stoked about that. Yeah, so this is an interesting one, because it kind of came off of a random idea that I had. I think I was browsing Pinterest and I saw like a picture of this like glam woman eating spaghetti at an Italian bistro somewhere, and I was like, okay, I like this idea. How can I take this and make it me? And that's kind of at the heart of it, right? Is like we get inspiration everywhere, but for me, I want to take something and make it uniquely my own. So I decided that I was going to start with this glam woman eating spaghetti in the house, but I knew that I wanted to include more of the environment, because that's what I do, and to provide more context. And so it kind of was this kind of iterative evolutionary process of, okay, here's the starting point, and then this is how I kind of make it a little bit more me. I'm going to shoot in my house. It's cheap and easy that way. I know kind of the mood that I want to create as this sort of mysterious vibe. So I'm going to go with a nighttime scene, which means introducing like blue gels in my lighting for that kind of nighttime effect. And then, if I have blue, I need something to contrast that and to bring out the color, or bring out our subject. So I'm going to put her in this orange dress that's the complement blue. And then my spaghetti has these kind of like orangey tones to it too. So this is, this is a split or a complementary color scheme. And so that's kind of a walkthrough of how my brain goes through this process. And, like I said, it's all the pieces are kind of there, but you don't really know what it's going to look like until you actually get there and shoot it. But as long as you have those components kind of generally figured out initially, once you get there, it's easy enough to put the pieces together. So yeah, that's kind of the story of that one.
I love it.
It's one of my favorites.
Yes, I love it. You mentioned earlier that you're, painter, and you hand paint your backdrops, and then you turn that into a business. Talk to us about your backdrop studio and sort of like what that evolution was in terms of, you mentioned you started to paint your own, and are they things that people, physical or digital backdrops? Talk to us about that.
Yeah, well, I decided I didn't have enough on my plate, so I was going to start a side hustle, because why not? No, well, I mean, I mentioned when I first started shooting fashion photography, like many people who are interested in that, it was all about like the hand-painted Oliphant style backdrop, but I didn't have the Oliphant budget at the time, so I was like, I'm just gonna make something for myself. How hard can this be? And turns out it was pretty hard. But over the years, I kept painting new ones, because I have this problem where I have to reinvent the wheel every time, and I can't use the same props at all. So I just kept kind of painting new ones, and then all of a sudden I had this inventory of hand painted backdrops. So I started a little Etsy shop and started selling them off that way. And then before I knew it, people started asking me for custom backdrops, which was cool, and definitely for the first year or two in business kind of kept me afloat. So it's always good to diversify. But after a while, I kind of wanted to sort of stray away from the hand painted aspect of things, just for timing, and it's a lot of work, and I commend anyone who does that. So instead, I started digitizing those so that I would have digital kind of textured backdrops, and then this just kind of snowballed into the whole backdrop studio thing. So now I have the hand painted ones, I have the digital ones, I have printed ones, and then through kind of again revisiting my older landscape stuff, I've started to kind of create these more unique, like painterly landscape style backdrops too, which has been a really fun sort of side project for me to kind of create art in a way that's a little bit more different than my traditional conceptual stuff. And I just think it's cool because you have so many options to add different backgrounds and different kind of visual components to an image and really change them up that way. So yeah, that's been about a year and a half of this experiment. So
well, it is a great point, to folks listening out there, like, yeah, diversifying and thinking about, if there's something that you're drawn to and you love doing, those are things that maybe you can provide for others.
Yeah.
So it's really cool, and you guys all go check out. Is it the backdropstudio.com? Is that
Yes.
where people can check that part out? Okay,
yeah.
Awesome. We'll get to that later too. But let's talk a little bit back, go a little bit back in your story of this link between engineering and how has that kind of played into your, I always think that people's, like, in retrospect, we can see how like the different chapters of our lives come together. So
yeah.
What kind of engineer were you, and how does that fit?
Yeah, so I got into photography by accident through my engineering job. I was sent to New Zealand to do earthquake damage assessment. And then, kind of on these side adventures, fell into landscape photography that way. But I think I've always been kind of both a technically and creatively inclined person. So they've always been, I don't know if they've been warring with each other, but there wasn't really a way for them to kind of merge, I guess, until I kind of discovered photography. And I think there's an analytical side of me that's very type A, and I like to plan everything and I like to problem solve. And then there's the creative element too. And I think photography is kind of the perfect way to really merge both of those skill sets, and to use those technical tools to create. To me, it's kind of like it's the dream.
Well, and you can see that. I mean, you can see that in sort of the architecture, just the different elements. And I am not a pre-production producer, like all of that. And it takes a very certain skill set, and you can see how those all line up to make what you do, like you said, truly you. And I think that's so important for people out there. It's like, how do you take all this inspiration, but then make it truly you?
Yeah.
What are some of the things that you're most excited about moving forward in terms of, I know you mentioned at the beginning some commercial work, but maybe on the personal work side, I noticed that you had done a short film, getting into motion. Is that something you're continuing to explore?
Yeah. So there are far more things that I want to do in my life than I will ever be able to actually do. So there's always something on the horizon. I did just do my first kind of broadcast spot commercial, which I directed and shot the stills for. So that got me really excited. So
Congratulations. That's
Thank
awesome.
you. So yeah, I am definitely kind of moving into the motion realm, but I've found, kind of based on the trial and error process, that I love to direct. I hate to edit, and I don't want to do any of the camera operation. So if I can direct it and produce it and put the story together and work kind of in that realm, then that's definitely a direction I would like to go. And I do have some short film projects that are somewhere down the pipeline. I'm not quite sure where, but they're out there. And then I have also been starting to dip my toes in the CGI realm as well. So that's a whole thing too. I think my ultimate goal is to be able to create these sort of 3D environments in spaces or locations that I wouldn't have easy access to as a photographer. So that way, I could still shoot the people elements and treat it kind of in the same way that I would a composite, but then the actual spaces would be these like CGI architectural renderings.
Wow. And that takes the engineering part, coming back, and your fascination with architecture back in. How do you even, like, how do you do that?
YouTube. Lots of trial and error and YouTube tutorials. I mean, luckily, I think I have a decent amount of background building stuff. Like, I've done 3D rendering and 3D design in my engineering job, so I'm a little bit more familiar with the tools to build out the shapes. And architecture is relatively easy because it's mostly just straight lines. I'm not like trying to make faces, which is crazy. And then from the other aspect of things, like the photography stuff comes into play really nicely in CGI, because knowing how to light things is half the battle. So if you have a photography background, you're going to be able to light the scenes kind of in the same way, potentially with even more control than in a real world environment. So I think those elements, again, both like the photography and the engineering stuff, will kind of facilitate that process. I hope. We'll see. I'm very, very early in that process right now.
But I love that it sounds like you have endless ideas and you're actually doing them. So I think a lot of us get like, oh, that's an idea, that's an idea, that's an idea, but like this hesitancy to even start because we're not sure how it's going to get there. At least I
Yeah.
find myself in that state a lot. So
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just curious, like, do you, when you wake up in the morning and you've had a wild dream, when you have like, how do you maintain your ideas? Like, do you actually like have advice for people on, do you write them down? Do you have like an Evernote doc? Like, how are you with all this creativity? How do you manage it?
So I have a really, this is my true engineer coming out. I have an Excel spreadsheet
Nice.
with all of my my ideas, and I recommend this to anyone, that when you have an idea or you see something that inspires you, and it could be anything. I had a friend who like took an Instagram story photo of her boyfriend jumping in a hot tub in his clothes, and I was like, that's a cool idea for a photo shoot, and so I did it. Um, so you like, inspiration can strike anywhere in any way, and when it does, write it down. Like, put it in a note on your phone, write it on a sticky note, put it in your Excel spreadsheet, whatever. It doesn't matter, just write it down, and then if you when you have time, see if you can kind of compile those in sort of a master document so it's organized. um, but I do that, and every time that I feel like I'm not quite inspired, or I feel like I can't come up with an idea, I will always go back and reference that. And the vast majority of the time, there's an idea there that I can create, or something I see there kind of sparks a new idea.
Brilliant. Because I think there's the one thing of capturing it, and then there's the other thing of actually going back and looking at them.
Yeah,
And so if you've got it somewhat organized, then you do have that spot to go to.
for sure. And if you're more visual, I mean, I also have Pinterest boards too, so that's also a great resource to. And I go and revisit mood boards that I've made there all the time.
Nice. I have maybe one final question for you because this really it was on your Instagram, and you wrote, you know, that one piece that you keep coming back to when you think about what you'll have to top. Let me read this again. You know that one piece you keep coming back to when you think about what you'll have to to feel like you're evolving as an artist.
Yeah.
This image is it for me. I haven't found it yet, but I'm still searching.
Sorry for my poor grammar there.
No, I'm reading it. The thing you'll have to top to feel like you're evolving. I
Yeah.
mean, do you obviously are trying a ton of new things, but
Yeah.
I mean, what is your advice to people in terms of continuing to evolve? Is it going back to one image? Is it or and does it have to be conscious? Does it have to like, yeah, evolution as an artist?
I I think that the one thing and the only thing that you can do to evolve and grow as an artist is to just keep shooting, and shoot what strikes you in the moment. If shoot what is gonna advance your career. Like, it almost doesn't matter. You just need to like go through the process and take the steps. And sometimes you'll hit dead ends, and sometimes you'll go back to a different spot, and sometimes you'll find something that you never expected. But if you're not doing the work and you're not shooting, um, you're not going to make that progress. Or if you are, it's not going to be as fast, right? Like, I've had plenty of failures in my life. I've hit plenty of dead ends in photography. I've thought I wanted to do certain things, and did them, and found out that maybe they weren't things that I wanted to do. But I wouldn't have known any of that if I didn't just keep shooting constantly. Um, I'm lucky, and I recognize the fact that I'm super lucky, and that I'm always compelled to create no matter what. Um, I don't really struggle with creative blocks in that sense. Like, there are times where I don't know what to make, but I want to make something. And in situations like that, I will schedule a test shoot without a plan, right? Because you never know what's going to come out of that, and you might get something epic. You might not, but it doesn't hurt. And every experience is going to be a learning experience and a growing experience for you.
Great advice, Kate. And again, coming back to this notion of like, we can have our favorite images or favorite pieces of work that we've created, and yet, you know, there's no there. Like, there's still, you know, you don't. It sounds like what I'm hearing from you is, you know, you don't necessarily want to have that. Like, okay, I'm done.
No, because what's after that? Like,
right.
Not
exactly.
Yeah, for sure.
Exactly. Kate, I know there's so much more we could talk about. There's, you know, you teach, you know, there's just so much that you have to share for people. Where can people find you, follow you, make sure that they are, you know, find the Backdrop Studio, make sure that they know where you're, you know, where you are teaching and things like that?
Yeah. So I would say Instagram's probably the most up to date in terms of content. That's kind of my more curated portfolio stuff. I'm Kate Woodman _photo at Instagram. Website is katewoodman.com. I just joined Twitter, so I'm Kate Woodman Art on Twitter. And I think those are the places I'm kind of most active. And then the Backdrop Studio is thebackdropstudio.com and the Backdrop Studio on Instagram.
Awesome. Everybody go check all of those things out. Join the many people who follow and love and are inspired by Kate's work herself. I want to give some shout outs before we sign off, Kate. We had Christian Rold, who is saying she's another hello from another structural engineer moving into photography and videography in Norway. So
awesome.
Thank you, Christian, for joining. We had Jonathan in New Mexico. We had Amy from southern Sweden. We had Randy in Montana. And special shout out to Richard Terborg, who has also been on the podcast. And if you missed that episode, check it out. It's coming out audio, I think, next week, actually. So
awesome. Yeah, if you ever need to go to Amsterdam, Richard's your guy.
That's right. He's amazing as well. And I want to give a special shout out to Renee Robin, who introduced me to you, gave us a little personal intro. So
thanks, Renee.
Yes, thank you, Renee. Renee just launched brand new classes on compositing here at Creative Live too.
Excited.
Just launched yesterday. So very cool. But back to you, Kate. Thank you so much. It's just, that's your little family, the community of photographers.
For sure, Richard. Yeah, we're all collectively uplifting each other.
Exactly. Thank you so much for joining us today, Kate, and just been great to have you on and get to know more about your story and how you approach your work, and super grateful. So thank you again, everybody. We will see you here next time for future episodes of whether it is We Are Photographers here live on Creative Live TV or other episodes that we do here on Creative Live TV. You can scroll down at the page if that's where you're watching. You can RSVP to upcoming episodes. And of course, there's always the audio version of the podcast that you can subscribe to anywhere it is that you get your podcast. We have over 100 episodes, I think 117 or so now. So lots of amazing content and people for you to learn from and be inspired by. So that's it for now, but thank you again to Kate Woodman.
Pursuing creativity is arguably the most practical thing that you can do.
We humans are adaptation champions. That's what makes us human, our ability to imagine.
The hard part is to look inside and say, what are my invisible beliefs that I have about money? I wanted to figure out how it actually worked.
And you are really here because you became passionate about an idea.
What does it take to capture great photographs of birds? You have to be grounded in your cameras. You need to understand the technology.
Just like any band shoot, we're looking to capture great shots of the band themselves playing on stage. So the drummer shot, lead singer, guitars.
do you even prepare to shoot with your phone? And then we're actually going to go into the edit.
Once you hit rock bottom, there's no place to go but up. You learn what's real. You learn what's needed.
In astrophotography, there is a great deal more planning involved because you are literally shooting in the dark.
We can't change others, but we can change our perspective.
Wow, that's a good way to start the day.
I had tears in my eyes.
Hey guys, what's up? It's Chase Jarvis, founder and CEO of Creative Live. You all know that we have more than 2,000 classes and more than 10,000 hours of learning, inspirational, and motivational content on the platform. I'm super excited to announce a new experience on Creative Live. It's called Fast Class. You've told us that you're busy and sometimes it's hard to dive into a full class from start to finish. So essentially, we're now giving you a shortened highlight version of our top Creative Live classes. You can always dive into the full class with 5, 10, or 15 hours of great content. But now, if you're just looking to focus on a few of the highlights or want to be able to skip quickly to something that really interests you, you can now get a shortened fast class version of that class. We're also thinking this might be able to help you explore a new craft and save time while doing it. This is a great tool to curate your learning experience to help create the life that you seek. So you're probably thinking, great, how do I access this new experience on Creative Live? That's easy. All you have to do is be a subscriber to the Creator Pass, and then all this is yours.